huge differences, right? So probably better protection for the foot and the ankle, probably help those guys to run faster, jump higher, all of those things than the 1950s shoes on the left. So here's the thing that I want to point out about this. A lot of the racetracks that I've visited over the years are using antiquated grasses. And so, the big concern with this is if shoe technology can change drastically in 70 years, what can grass technology do in that same period? So, a lot of the tracks that I would visit, especially maybe the smaller tracks, were using a grass that was created in 1931. The technology is totally different. And in the last 10 years, how much things have changed is just absolutely mind-blowing. And so, I want to point out a little bit about the differences in grasses that we can grow in the transition zone as we go through this today. But as was pointed out, we don't have a lot of time, so we'll have to move through this fairly quickly. Next slide, Trey. All right, so transition zone. Right across kind of the middle of the country there, it depending on who you talk to, could be slightly higher than this, maybe slightly lower than this. But generally this area, one thing that most people will agree on is that the transition zone is moving farther north, whether that's from global warming or whatever the case is. There are places such as in Ohio and central Indiana that we would now consider transition zone that probably would never have been in the past. But so in the north part of the country, we're growing cool season grasses. Can you go back one? There we go. Cool season grasses, exclusively cold winters, warm summers. So cool season grasses make the most sense. In the southern part of the country, we've got hot summers, we've got warm winters, and so warm season grasses make the most sense there. In the transition zone, we've got hot summers and cold winters. And so what do you grow there? Cool season grasses or warm season grasses? Well, they all are horrible. So the transition zone is the one place on the planet where we can grow all grasses equally poorly. So let that sink in. It's hard to grow grass in the transition zone. There's not a good choice for anything, whether it's a lawn, golf course, athletic field, racetrack. There's not one good choice. They all are bad choice for the transition zone. And so you got to go into this thinking about keeping that in mind. Next one. All right, so really quickly, a little bit of differences between cool season grasses and warm season grasses. Remember, the cool season grasses are obviously the ones for the north. So they like moderate temperatures, 50s, 60s, maybe 70s, they're thriving. Whereas warm season grasses, they're thriving up into the 80s and 90s, maybe even low hundreds. They're doing just fine. As you can see there, we've got a seasonal growth chart for both of these grasses. And cool season grasses will do exceptionally well in the spring and the fall, but struggle in the summertime. So if your race meet is the start of fall, when your grass is doing really poorly coming out of the summertime, think about that in terms of, is this a good grass choice for me? I'm starting racing when my grass is as weak as it possibly can be. Whereas if we have a warm season grass, if our racing meet is at the start of fall, we're starting racing when our grass is as tough as it possibly can be, so it can recover. The cool season grasses, if you're running later in the fall, no big deal. They can recover and do fine. But if you're running in August and September, warm season grasses may be a better choice. Next one. All right, so let's talk about a few of these grasses really quickly. Bermuda grass is the only warm season grass that I'm going to talk about today. There are plenty of other warm season grasses, but this is the one that is exclusively used for racing in the United States for the transition zone and for the southern U.S. All right, so really good qualities that Bermuda grass have that really work well with horse racing. So it's got heat tolerance, drought tolerance, wear tolerance. This grass will take an absolute beating before it starts to thin out. It also has rhizomes and stolons, runners that grow above ground and below ground that help divots to fill in very quickly. Salt tolerance, if you live in a place where that's a concern, establishes quickly, not a whole lot of issues with pests, And because it's such a fast grower, it keeps weeds at bay pretty well on its own. The other thing is, look at that picture on the top right there. This is a tray of grass that I took this picture when I lived in Virginia a million years ago. This was going on their football field. But look how short the grass is, but look how deep the root system is. And so that's one of the big things that I really like about Bermuda grass. We all talk about having a good root system for holding things together, holding the growing media together, so that the horses aren't slipping, they're not divoting a whole lot, and Bermuda grass plays right into this, holding things together much better than other grasses because of the amount of roots that it produces. But it's not perfect, right? There's no great grass, perfect grass for the transition zone. Goes dormant in the wintertime. Cold tolerance is a concern, can die off, and you just have nothing there come spring. Shade tolerance, that's not so much of an issue typically on horse tracks, but has to have full sun. Invasive, and Jamie's going to show you a picture of what they're doing to combat that at Churchill Downs. Thatchy, and so you have to airify and vertical mow and things like that. There's got to be management practices so the grass doesn't get super thatchy. It's tough to mow, and so having a good reel mower ideally is how this grass should be mowed. Likes to be fertilized, and then has a disease called spring dead spot that can be an issue, and just have areas obviously in the spring that just don't green back up. So lots to like and maybe a few things to not like about it, but the new Bermuda grasses that are coming out these days have really good cold tolerance. Texture is very fine, density is very good. Traffic tolerance is even higher than traditional Bermuda grasses, and drought tolerance is exceptional. So the new ones are phenomenal compared to even 10 years ago. Next one. All right, tall fescue. I love tall fescue, absolutely love it. And as a matter of fact, I petitioned the Kentucky governor to change the name from the Bluegrass state to the tall fescue state, but he wasn't having it. But lots to like about it. Color's great, doesn't need a whole lot of fertilizer, good wear tolerance. So it can take a beating from traffic, horses running over it without getting tore up. Shade tolerance is decent, has deep roots, and so better than other cool season grasses. It will hold things together better than other cool season grasses for sure. Heat tolerance is good for the transition zone, and they can have endophytes. And endophyte is a fungus that lives inside the intercellularly inside the plant and takes good things, nutrients and such from the plant, but gives back stress tolerance. And so you got a healthier plant because of it. Texture is not as good as some other plants, although it's getting better and better. Bunch type, traditionally we would call this a bunch type grass that doesn't spread from rhizomes or stolons, but that's changing as well, and I'll mention that really quickly here in a second. So because it's bunch type, we think of its traffic recovery, so filling in divots is not exceptional. But again, I'll mention that here quickly in a second. Cold tolerance. When I say poor cold tolerance, it is absolutely fine for the transition zone. I'm talking about where Dr. Rogers lives up there in Michigan. You may have some really cold winters where you lose some tall fescue from time to time, but it does absolutely fine in the transition zone. And then the one disease we have to watch out for with tall fescue is brown patch. And with our mowing heights on turf tracks, that is even worse of a problem because it likes to blow up in the tall mowing heights. All right, so new tall fescues, better disease tolerance, and so we're seeing less issues with brown patch, less issues with gray leaf spot. Cold tolerance is good, so we are seeing recommendations in Michigan and Minnesota, places like that. We can mow these things down short now, and the new ones are coming out with rhizomes. And so all tall fescues, have the ability to spread and always have, but typically they're spread so little that we think of them as bunch type. The new ones, especially if they're specifically bred for this, are showing much more vigorous rhizomes and aggressive tillering. And so they're filling in divots much quicker than tall fescues of old. And so, you know, in years past, I would say, you know, tall fescue, maybe not the greatest grass for a track. And that's obviously the Keeneland track there in the bottom right. And when I took that picture a number of years ago, it was a hodgepodge of fescues and some bluegrass in there. I think even a little bit of ryegrass in there, but the divots didn't recover all that well. The ones from today would do much better than what was on Keeneland when I took this picture. All right, next one. Kentucky Bluegrass, a lot to like about Kentucky Bluegrass, and these ones are also getting better than they were in the past. Color is great, texture is great, easy to mow. You don't have to have specialized mowing equipment to keep this stuff looking good. Rhizomes and aggressive rhizomes to fill in divots. Very cold tolerant. Drought tolerance is good, but what it does is it goes dormant when it senses drought, which we probably don't want to have on a racetrack. And then it can be thatchy because of those rhizomes. And so this is a grass also, we're gonna have to take care of that thatch with aerification or something like that. So things that I don't like about it though, for racing, traffic tolerance is exceptionally bad. It just does not, will not take a beating, but it will recover once it starts to thin out because of those rhizomes. It'll start to fill back in. Heat tolerance is not great. And so this is one of the issues that I have with Kentucky being the bluegrass state. You know, a lot of summers, Kentucky bluegrass will struggle in Kentucky. New ones, though, have much better heat tolerance, where we're seeing them in places like Atlanta and doing okay. So shallow roots doesn't hold the soil together as well as tall fescue or Bermuda grass. Shade is an issue with it, but again, not a big deal on tracks. Likes to be fertilized, really needs that to perform at its best, and then has a number of problems that it can run into with diseases and insects during the heat of the summer. But, you know, again, new ones, better quality, better disease tolerance, can mow them shorter, and they have better heat tolerance. And so again, we're seeing improvements. I don't know that I would ever still say, yeah, go out and plant an entire turf track to tall fescue, or excuse me, Kentucky bluegrass in the transition zone. But I would say there's probably a happy medium between tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass that would do well with these new varieties of each. Next one. All right, perennial ryegrass is the grass that I absolutely love to hate. I hate perennial ryegrass, hate it with a passion. When it's good, man, it's good. You see it on the bottom left there, that picture that I took at the University of Tennessee as an overseed in Bermuda grass. But when it's bad, man, it's bad. It just gets tore up with disease. It doesn't, it can struggle with some heat sometimes. And so it can just look like a mess if it's not kept up with really, really well. And so that's one of the reasons I don't like it, is that it requires more maintenance than other cool season grasses to look good through the summertime. But it's really good color, good striping, texture is good, density is good, has really good wear tolerance. And that's one of the reasons why we'll see it on some places where they get beat up, is because it will take a while for it to thin out. Germinates exceptionally quick, and that's another reason why people start to use this grass, is because, hey, I've got a thin area here, I can throw out some ryegrass, get it to fill in quickly. And when I say quickly, I mean 4, 5, 6 days, very quickly. And you don't see that problem area. Well, you do start to see the problem area the next summer when it starts to get hot again and that grass starts to go away on you. And then perennial ryegrass can also have endophytes as well. Not every one of the perennial ryegrasses and tall fescues will have endophytes. It will have to say on the bag, and you have to pay attention to when it was tested, because endophytes can also die if they're left in the bag for a number of years. Things I don't like about it: bunch type. Again, just tillering. Again, there's some lateral spread type ryegrasses out there now, but most of them are thought of as bunch type. Grows very quickly, so you have to mow it a lot, and it's a very stiff blade, so you have to have a good sharp mower to mow it well. So recovery because of the bunch type is not great. Cold tolerance is not great, but it's fine for the transition zone. Shade, heat, drought tolerance, all not great. And then all of those diseases at the bottom there, it just will get hammered with disease. And so things to think about with this grass is your maintenance practices will go up tremendously if you're growing perennial ryegrass. Next one. All right, really quickly here on National Turfgrass Evaluation Program. This is where I send people when they tell me, okay, I want this kind of grass. If I want Bermuda grass or tall fescue or perennial ryegrass, whatever it is, go look at the grasses that are being tested in this www.ntep.org, tested at universities across the country. This is not perfect, but it's the best that we have. You can find out which varieties in your area are doing the best. And so it's a good tool to use to figure out, is this something that I want to buy and use on my track or not? All right, next one. And keep this in mind, right? So I talked about the technology improvements in shoes from the 1950s to 2019. You all remember this, Zion Williamson at Duke a few years ago when he just absolutely blew out of his shoe. You know, when you put that much stress and strain on anything, there's likely going to be times when the technology will fail. And so, you know, it happens with shoes. It can happen with grasses too. If it gets so hot and humid and crazy and you've got a lot of traffic on it, chances are you're going to see some problems from time to time, even with the advanced technology. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Rogers.
Thank you, Greg. Nice job. So what I think we're chasing here, and I've been doing a lot of work in sports fields over the years, and I'm always teaching my students. And there's a guy here in the room right now who chased this perfect turf with the Philadelphia Phillies for decades. And what goes into that perfect turf? And for me, you can talk about, I need a well-drained, I need a resilient surface, tolerate traffic. Greg was talking about that. I need a soil that will support plant growth, need the proper environment, and I need stability. So if you think about it, every speaker this morning has been talking or dancing around every one of those attributes. Now, for me, I think the perfect racing turf is in the same boat. So I don't think there's a lot of differences here. So it's been easy for me to transition some of our thoughts as to what's going on. So again, we're talking about 3 different areas. So we've talked about turf grass selection. One of the things that you're going to do if you're going to have any kind of turf racing surface at all is you're going to reestablish. Why? Because things are going to get torn up. That's what athletic fields do. That's what golf courses do. It's a constant reestablishment battle. So the techniques involving reestablishment must be understood. They must be followed, more importantly. And so for me, what I'd like to talk to you about is this idea of sodding. And sodding is an instant green. People love the idea behind sodding, but there is a major rule that you must follow in sodding in order to be successful. And I want to drive it home to you today. It's my only thing I want to talk about from that standpoint. Now, we've had quite a movement in the sodding technology from the small roll, which is on the right, to now we have what's called big roll sod, which can be 3 foot wide, 50 feet long, and that can sod a lot of turf, a lot of area in a hurry. However, what I want to talk to you about is this idea of called soil layering, because nothing can contribute to soil layering quicker than what you think is a nice sod job. There is 2 ways that sod can be, that when you put sod over the top of soil, or any type of soil, you have put a layer on here. There's 2 rules. If the material that you've sodded is coarser, sandier than the material underneath, it will drain fine. If you do it the other way, where it's finer than the sand underneath, finer, then that water will be held up. And when I say water held up, that means it will not drain to the next layer readily. And if it does not drain readily to the next layer, those roots have everything they want and need right there. And they will simply not penetrate to the level that you're looking for. And when that happens, and you put a little bit of traffic on there and start to compress that soil at all, you run into a shelf life or a lifespan of that sod that basically goes down to nothing. So it'll start off by having this black layer to it, meaning there's no oxygen getting into the soil. It's totally wet all the time. And there'll be no rooting. Interestingly, this can be measured. Okay. There is no excuse for not doing this, because you can always tell just by simply measuring the root zone and the soil of the sod and make a comparison through a simple test comparing these two. So this is not guesswork, not guesswork. That I don't need to go into what the technology here, only to point out to you is that any good soil testing laboratory would be able to determine this for you. Now, reason I brought it up is because we had to employ this at Churchill Downs when they did the renovation. As many people have mentioned, we made the decision to go with a Bermuda grass growing up in Evansville, Indiana. However, the soil that it was growing on was not going to be compatible with the root zone that had been chosen for the sand. So this was too fine. If we would have grown it in this, it would have not matched. So the objective became, can we top dress this soil with this sand, have the grass grow up through it, and then harvest it at a period of time? So if you think, well, what do you mean top dress? I mean, literally, here goes the top dresser, to a point where we took about 1,600 tons of sand over that 9 acres and built up about 5/8 of an inch. And I know that first day when I took Jamie Richardson out there to see how things going, I think he about had a heart attack that day. That's my grass, he said. I said, oh yeah, well, it's going to, trust me, it's going to grow up through there. It's Bermuda grass. And as we went through the summer, it finally grew up through there to where we could harvest it and then eventually put it on there. Okay. But what do we know? We know we have a compatible sod. It has become compatible. We also know that the technology exists, that if you have the resources to do it, it can be done. Why am I even saying this? 10 years ago, I couldn't have made this statement. We didn't have the resources. We didn't have the top dressers that were good enough. We didn't have the sod cutters that were good enough, but we do now. When I got involved with Keeneland in 2020, Alfredo began to teach me all about horse racing turf. And one of the things was they had a very dense, condensed schedule at Keeneland on this track. And one of the things that we realized that we needed to do, or I needed to implement with this, guys, was a technique that Mike Burkhalter's been doing for decades, but it's called pre-germinating seed. And the idea here is we were using perennial ryegrass as well as tall fescue, as well as fine fescue, but it's been done by the major leagues for a long time. It's kind of gotten replaced by big roll sod. So in other words, they no longer had to do this because they could bring in big roll sod. I don't think horse racing's at that point yet, but they don't have to do it anymore, but it doesn't mean it wasn't a great technique. And I think that it can lend itself to this. And so if this just looks to you like a bunch of big barrels that have been filled with water and fish aerators inside of it, you got a great eye, because that is exactly what it is. And so what you do is that's a mover. Yeah, you're good. So you fill seed, and then you weigh that seed down, then you put the whole thing in the bucket. And basically you're asking that seed to go through the pre-germination process so that when you harvest it, it's ready to germinate. And you don't have to sit there and keep the surface wet for a long period of time like you would if you were germinating seed. You used a lot of different seeds. We had Kentucky Bluegrass, Perennial Ryegrass, chewing fescue, and some tall fescue. A couple of things that you have to do. You don't want to leave it in there too long. You got to change the water every 12 hours, right, Alfredo? And then these guys found that the more aerators they put in, the more oxygen you were putting in there. So that's logic, and that helps things work out. But that's another technique that if you'd ever like to employ that, let us know, let me know. But here's the end of the product. I mean, this is after 4 or 5 days, you can see we don't have just breaking dormancy. We've got grass that's up and it's giving you that green fuzz that can grow. Certainly can provide from an aesthetic standpoint, take a lot of heat off. So this is a technique, again, we didn't make any of this up. National Football League was using it for way back in the 1970s. So it's nothing brand new about any of this. The final thing I want to talk to you about is two quick what's called management factors. And basically mowing and mowing frequency and fertilizer. And I got 2 slides left here. This is the first one. And this is plants per 100 square centimeters or 100 square miles, I don't care. And then on the bottom is the number of passes that a traffic machine has made over time. And the green line is where we mowed once a week. And the blue line is where we mowed twice a week. So you can see the effect that mowing has on turf density and how that follows right down. Now, let me give you one more. What if I combined, this is the low mowing and improper fertilization with high mowing and proper fertilization. Look at my gap now. Okay. Do you need to pay attention to this? Does mowing and fertilizing make a difference in how long your track will perform? Yes, it does. Okay, Jamie Richardson.
Thank you, Trey and Greg. I appreciate that. You know, at the risk of sounding redundant here, you know, I think we really looked at everything we were doing here at Churchill and opted to go with warm season grasses with the Bermuda. You know, I talked to numerous experts in sports turf, and everyone was of the opinion Bermuda was the way to go with where we are in the transition zone. You know, Leif Dickinson, some of you might know from Del Mar, was adamant. He was like, if you can grow Bermuda, grow it. And, you know, everyone that knows Kentucky summers, we can grow Bermuda. You know, it's getting through the early spring meet, obviously Derby week, first week in May, and then our November meet. And, you know, we're frequent, you know, we have the Breeders' Cup frequently here. So we need to be prepared for that. But everybody was like, overseeding ryegrass is you know, old school technology. So, you know, right now we're using perennial ryegrass and looking at other options. Quickly, these slides, we'll go through these slides. This was taking up the old turf, ripping out the old hedge. And we obviously took the top 3-4 inches off and just trashed that. And we did actually salvage the drainage sand underneath. As you can see, we captured some of the drainage sand underneath in the subgrade, and we actually blended that with a finer sand. That was a little coarse to use straight. So Trey, you know, Trey did, you know, a good deal of footwork, and myself and Trey, but Trey especially, finding the proper blend with a little finer sand that made that an ideal growing medium for what we were looking for drainage and then stability also. After we got the subgrade down, we, as you can see, you laid a barrier down with the flat drains. You know, the drainage on this course, I think we had 28 inches of infiltration rate per hour. I know that will go down over time, but it could go down significantly and we're still going to be fine. There are more flat drains, and the flat drains tie into the drainage system on the inside. This is the layer of stone over top of the flat drains and the barrier over the subgrade. You know, the water just runs right through that. And then we have the growing medium that we picked. On top of that, there's, I guess we did 6 inches of stone and 12 inches of growing medium is what we have there, and then sodded on top of that. So there you see the growing medium going in, and then there is the sod being laid last October. And we used Tahoma 31. I think that was mentioned earlier. You know, the Bermudas have come a long way in the cold tolerance, and, you know, we looked at Tahoma 31 and it just pointed to be the right Bermuda for us for what we're looking for. There's an aerial photograph of almost probably 50% of the course, maybe even a little bit more, being sodded. And then there's our irrigation system that Tim Fredericks designed for us. And it is an excellent drainage system or irrigation system. I mean, he's done work for Glenn up at NTRA, and Tim does design a heck of a system. I can't say enough good things about Tim. So, contacts in the industry, guys like Glenn, I mean, they some of these guys that do this work, Tim Fredericks, irrigation, it's just nice having those contacts. Those guys have done irrigation at other tracks, and it's really nice to have guys that know what you're trying to accomplish out here on a racetrack. I suppose it's a little different doing a golf course or a stadium. So it made doing this project much easier having guys that knew what you were trying to accomplish. And so that's the end, and I appreciate that, Trey. Thank you.
From the same spot, you can watch kind of over the February and March. That's the latest one. The grass is the ryegrass. The green that you see is not the Bermuda grass. That's the ryegrass. It's been overseeded. It has not come out of dormancy in Louisville yet, but still have a good 2 months there. It wasn't without some skips. You're at the turf farm. You can see this was a slide I showed my students. I said, is there anything wrong here? I said, well, first of all, turf doesn't die in straight lines. Okay, so if it's going to die, it's not going to die naturally in straight lines. This simply just got skipped by the overseed, so you got to go back in and do that. Jamie, here's your Zoysia grass. Did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so Trey came up with a good idea. Zoysia grass is not as invasive. It doesn't creep nearly as quickly as Bermuda grass. So we decided to use Zoysia on some of the steep banks so that it's not creeping out onto the dirt track so quickly. It's if you look at that bank, it's pretty steep to mow, but Zoysia grass grows slower and doesn't creep as much. So it was multifaceted there to make that decision it's not an easy bank to mow, and then it won't creep out onto the dirt track nearly as much. So that was a good call by Trey. And that is
yeah, go ahead, Jamie.
This is our nursery that we put in. We're gonna play with some different things. We're looking at overseeding with other grasses. I don't know how much Trey wants to talk about that, but we're with Dr. Munshaw and with Dr. Rogers, we're looking at potentially Bermuda. We're doing some testing to see. Right now we use Perennial Ryegrass to overseed, but that is subject to change if we come up with something that seems to work better.
Yes, I'll just add that we're very excited about the fact that Churchill Downs was able to find a spot where we could do this kind of research, and right there on the spot. So that'll be that's a nice, this final slide, Jamie, I think I've tried to kind of summarize for you the approach for at least 2022. You got 3 things to think about. First of all, you got January to January. Then you've got the race meets are in blue. You got the idea that we'll be overseeded with perennial ryegrass. We're right about here right now, all the way through. We'll have to chemically remove that ryegrass. As Gregg Munshaw has already pointed out to you, it's almost impossible to remove because the breeders have done such a great job of making it heat tolerant. Well, that's great. So you have to chemically remove it to where you grow only Bermuda grass for around 100 days. About the same time, we're having a short meat season at the end of September, then go back into that heavy overseeding again. The idea behind the Bermuda grass, this has been learned from the golf courses from years and years of work, is that you need to let Bermuda grass grow unencumbered for about 100 days. If you do that, then it can basically be that same mat that you want it to be during the racing seasons in October, November, and again in April. I think that's it. We're already over time probably, but
I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised with your Tahoma. You're going to be lucky if you'll have any rye left on that track by July or by June, actually.
well,
We-
yeah, the comment by Mike Burkhalter, who probably one of the more has more knowledge than anybody from a practical standpoint. Yeah, we're very optimistic that things will go well.
We have green leaf tissue on that grass that on Tahoma 31 by the end of March. And by June 1st last year, we had maybe 1% of rye left in with no chemical removal. That was 2 light verticuttings and it got rid of it.
It'll be in, yeah, I will say this, but I'll speak for both Gregg Munshaw and Jamie on this, is that we're more than willing to go down this road because we believe in science. We're also just as want everybody to understand that this is a work in progress. And we're going to try to blaze some new ground for the whole industry, really. Get some knowledge, particularly in the transition zone. I've probably taken too much time already.
Oh, no, thank you very much. Do we have another hand? Thank you. I think this is a very important topic for the industry and certainly important for those people who are trying to fill races is having turf.